said, I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at HALT. I've been with HALT since 2014. I used to be based in London. I am now based in Dubai. But as you may know, we are a global business school. So I actually travel and I teach around the world nonetheless. So the campus we call home is just mostly what we put on the slides rather than where we actually spend our time. And other than teaching at HALT, of course, I also work quite a lot with large organizations, mostly governments lately, but multinationals in the past. And many of the conversations I've had with them, and I still do have with them, are around how difficult it is to make strategic decisions in a world that surrounds us right now. And it's so fast changing. It's so unpredictable. So how do you make these decisions? And so that's the topic for today. It's really a question that came from the business, and I think that it's important to answer it. So I'm going to give you the high-level takeaways. So these are the first few things you should focus on. And at the end, we'll review them to make sure that I actually covered everything and I delivered what I promised. So the first topic we'll talk about is different trajectories of change, linear and non-linear. And the non-linear change is difficult, hard to navigate. It's difficult to make decisions within it. And the decision context that we live in is increasingly VUCA. I'll tell you what it means in a moment, so don't worry. But in this type of context, prediction of the future, first of all, becomes incredibly inaccurate. But even to the extent that you can predict the future, that's still not the right way to prepare for the future. And preparedness is a better strategy. And I'll tell you more about it. And finally, I'll give you a couple of techniques and methodologies to prepare for the future. Now, the first one we'll talk about is antifragility. We'll talk about it shortly, but I'll give you the core of it. And then we talk about strategic foresight. Now, enough intro. I hope you can hear me well. I hope you can see the slides because I want to show you something and I want you to look carefully. I'll be upfront with you. This is a slide that shows a public health issue that happened in the United States over the last 50, 60 years. And I'm not an expert of public health. So we're not looking at it from the perspective of public health. We're looking at it from the perspective of change. So what do you see here? It's a map of the US, of course. And for each state, you see a different color. So the light azure represents the states where the obese population, the prevalence of obesity in the population was less than 10%. And the darker shade of azure, the obese population is a bit higher, between 10 and 14%. I think this is quite easy, right? It's intuitive, you can see it. This is 1985. So let me take you through time. Let's take a walk in time and see what happens in 1986, 87, 88, 89, 90. And in 1991, something happens. Wow, we now have a new color because now we have states where the prevalence is above 15%. Then we continue. In 94, something else happens. We have to drop a category because we no longer have any state with less than 10%. Okay, I'm going to move a bit faster now because now you see new colors, we drop colors, new colors, 2007, 2008, 2009, and by 2010, we no longer had any state with less than 20% of obese population. Now, this happened over a fairly long period of time. I just have a couple of questions for you. So this is where we're going to use the first few polls. So let me tell you how you can do this. If you have a QR code scanner or with an iPhone, just your camera, just take a screen grab. You grab this QR code here. I think Steven is posting the link in the chat. So an easy way to do it, just click on it. So you can open the chat and click on the link. Or you can go to www.menti.com. You spell it M-E-N-T-I. And once there, you can insert the code 741760. Now, when you get there, you will be asked to put your name in. The poll is not open. I'll open it for you. So I'll give you a moment to do this procedure. Just log in, get to the right place, and I will share my screen so that you can see the poll. Okay, wow, I already see many of you are there. We're still waiting for a few. Let me tell you what to expect here. We will take 3 questions in a row, and you will be scored. You will get points based on how accurately you answer and how fast you answer. Okay, so 2 factors: right answer and give it fast. So some of you are still joining. If anybody has, and so the code, Yashvi, the code you can see at the top of the screen is 74 17 60. All right, so when I open this, what happens is you will see a short countdown of 3 seconds in your screen. And after that, the question appears and you have a few seconds to reply. All right, I think that most of you are here. So let me start. Three, two, one. So was this a trend? What you saw on that map changing, was that a trend? A few seconds left. Time is up. And it's loading. Yes, it was a trend. So most of you answered correctly. Well done. So let's see what happened to the who's first, who was the fastest to reply. I think Kat, Courtney, Riska, well done. But there are still a few questions, so please be prepared. Let's go on with a more interesting question. Now the question is, why was this a trend? What is it that made it a trend? All right, time is up. Let me see. Excellent. Very, very well done. So obviously I'm not testing your knowledge. I mean, you're not expected to know this. I'm asking these questions for you to reflect, so for you to be engaged and learn. The answer is, when we look at a phenomenon that we describe as a trend, it has 3 characteristics. It is usually a large-scale phenomenon, it lasts a long period of time, and it progresses in a consistent direction, okay? It keeps going in the same direction. So the correct answer this time was all of the above. That's the best answer. But you all answered correctly in some way, so I'm happy to see that. All right, so the leaderboard must now have been updated. Let's see. So Riska's number 1, Mitul, James, Pau. Okay, let's see if we can change that. Question number 3. You'll see the countdown now. What other trends are happening right now that are similar? Now, similar is the key word here. All right. Nah, wrong answer. That's me being tricky. Once again, I'm not testing your knowledge here. I'm trying to provoke you a little bit. Why do I say that the trend of the emergence of digital technologies is not similar to this? Why is global warming not similar? Why is economic inequality not similar? Well, that's what's coming next. I'm going to show you why. I'm going to show you how. All right. So this was just a little provocation. So let's see. I mean, I don't think that the leaderboard has changed, but don't worry. If you haven't won, just keep the poll open, because we'll come back to this and there are 3 more questions later. But for the time being, let me go back to the lecture. Let me go back to the main topic of today. So what you saw here, let me go back to the early slides. I want to show you something very, very simple, very, very carefully, okay? Look at these southern states here near Florida. Look at them, look at the color, okay? As you can see, year on year, the colors can become lighter or darker. So year after year, the phenomenon doesn't change it all that much. It's only over a long period of time that you see what's going on. Okay, and then it becomes darker and darker and darker. So when you're faced with this type of phenomena, they are difficult to deal with, and they represent trends of change that companies have to respond to. Now, a couple of things around what caused this trend. As I said, I'm not an expert in public health, so don't take my answer as final. But there are three main reasons that we know of. We can also bundle them into two main reasons. The first big reason was a diet change, a change in diet. Why? Because people in the US, American residents, started eating more processed food at home, like ready meals, and they started eating more fast food. And also the other thing is also behavioral. The other cause is behavioral. It is related to an increased use of cars. People started being able to afford cars more, so they bought more cars, they walked less, and that affected the prevalence of obesity in the country. What makes this so difficult to deal with, however, is that you don't know that the appearance of McDonald's or other fast foods or the appearance of processed food or the prevalence of cars is going to have that consequence in the long run. Why not? Because imagine it's 1985, you live in Manhattan, you walk down from your apartment, you walk onto the street, and you see a fast food that just opened. When you look at it, you don't think, oh, obesity. You think, oh, modernity, progress, convenience, the world is going in the right place. I live in a good neighborhood. Then you notice that your neighbors start parking more cars. You don't think, oh, they're not walking enough. You think, wow, it means that they are doing well. Financially, they're doing well. It means that I'm in a good place and the world is going in the right direction. So does that make sense? What I'm trying to say here is that the early signals of change can fool us. We may not see where they're headed. Okay? So this was the first type of change that we look at. It's a trend and it's a linear change because there are some forces, so the diet and the driving cars, these are two forces that push in a direction. And over time, we go in this direction. I hope you're fine with me using my hands. I'm Italian, so I need to use my hands to explain concepts. I'm sorry, I can't control it. But so before I go on, is everything clear so far? Do I speak too fast, too slow? Is it not clear? Am I confusing or is it okay? You can use the chat. Thank you, Hannah. Excellent. All right, that's good. So I can go on and I can show you something different, right? I was going to show you some trajectories of change that are not like this. Let's look at them. So this is an example of what happens in individual countries. What happens to the number of first-class seats on airplanes? Okay, how many first-class seats do we sell, tickets do we sell in a country when there are more wealthy people in that country? So the number of wealthy people increases and the number of first-class seats in that country also increases. Quite obvious, right? It's nothing surprising there. What happens when the amount of people who travel in a country? What happens to the first-class seats? Well, when the number of people who travel by plane in a country increases, once again, first-class seats increase. Again, I don't think there's anything surprising here. It's a bit like what we just said, right? As behaviors change, so diet change, and people drive car more, obesity rate grows. It looks the same. But what happens in those countries where both things happen at the same time? So there are both more wealthy people and they travel by plane more. What happens to first-class seats? Now you would expect the two forces are going in the same direction, so they will increase even more. But that's not what happens. When there are more wealthy people and they travel more, the number of first-class seats actually goes down quite fast. In some cases, you can see the data here from The Economist. In some cases, it declines over 40% in just 10 years. And why is that? Well, because then if you are wealthier and you travel more, it now makes sense to travel with private jets. So even though the trends seem to go in a certain direction, then suddenly the combination of forces changes that direction unexpectedly. So you understand that this is different from what we saw before. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 more examples, okay? This is an example that describes the state of the art, what we know about global warming. And what this map represents is the previous belief, the consensus that if the temperature, average temperature of the planet goes up by 1 Celsius, okay, it goes up a little bit, then the yellow phenomena will happen. And these are all terrible phenomena. If it goes up even more to 3 Celsius, then the orange phenomena happen, which are even worse. And if we push it, we increase the temperature even more to above 5 Celsius degrees, then finally the red catastrophic events will happen. Okay, this is the way we used to think. But Professor Stefan and his colleagues, they published this in Nature, which is one of the most influential scientific magazines on the planet. They published last year, and they said, we're fooling ourselves. This is not the way it works. What really happens is that if the temperature goes up by 1 Celsius, yeah, the yellow catastrophic events will happen. But when the yellow catastrophic events happen, then they will cause and precipitate the orange one. You can see all these arrows that represent the interconnected phenomena. And when the orange ones happen, then they will precipitate and cause the red ones. So in a way, we kind of feel that if we keep increasing the temperature, certain events will happen. But what we see here is that it's enough to reach certain tipping points. And when we get there, everything else will come crashing down on its own. You can no longer control it. Whereas in the previous example, the first example, if we stopped eating processed food and fast food and started exercising more, the obesity rate would be reversed and go down. But this is not the case in global warming. So it's a different type of change. I have a few more. I hope you can still follow. I have a lot of content today, so I hope you're you're ready for it. Because I'm going to show you another type of change, and this is typical of digital technologies. What you see on the screen is the computing power that you could buy at different moments in history for $1. And you can see all of last century was effectively flat. And then at some point, maybe 12 years ago, 13 years ago, early 2000s, the curve starts to move a little bit. And then it seems to go faster and faster. So if you imagine being here and you look back, you say, oh, up to 10 years ago, they were in the dark ages. But if this keeps happening at the same pace as we see it, in 10 years, today will be the dark ages. We will look back and say, wow, we were so primitive back then. We couldn't do anything interesting. And I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. The first thing, of course, is that how rapidly improvement happens, but also how big the improvement is. What I want to point out is that if you look at this, each little dot you see on the map, on the graph, is a year. If you look at what happens in just 3 years, okay, here, it's much more than you've ever experienced in all of human history up to that point. And this makes this type of change very difficult to navigate and to deal with. Look, think about your phone. You all have very good cameras on your phone, I'm pretty sure. Maybe you have 12 megapixels, 16 megapixels, which are pretty good. Now, it was good when it came out, maybe 3 years ago or so. But then 2 years ago, the new generation technology came out, which is around 40 megapixels. And now you think, wow, 40, it's a lot. What can you do with it? It doesn't matter because the next year, so last year, the new generation came out and it's 108 megapixels. So what I'm trying to say is that in the last 2 years, we had an improvement in the technology that was many times larger than anything we've ever seen. And it's so fast and so dramatic that you have to keep up with it. And it's difficult to see where it's headed. Okay, once again, digital technologies are progressing with a trajectory that is non-linear. There's another type of changes that it's not about the trajectory, it's about our knowledge. So I'm going to use a little metaphor here, a little example to explain what I'm trying to say. What you see is a swan. So I'm going to tell you what a swan is, just to give you an example. Okay, I know you know what a swan is. I use this as an example of human knowledge. So you see this bird, you say it's a swan. What's it like? Well, it's a bird. It doesn't fly. It can fly, but it doesn't really fly. It mostly swims. It has an orange beak, a long neck. It has feathers. It has wings, and the feathers are white. So all of this is our theory of the swan, so to speak. It's all we know about the swan. And how do we use this knowledge? Well, in two ways. First, when we see a bird that looks like this, we say, oh, that's a swan, because it matches our theory. And if we're looking for a swan, we say, let's look for something that looks like this, because that's what our theory tells us. Okay, this is the way our knowledge works. And you can spend your entire life being persuaded that this is the way the swans are. And you make all of your decisions based on this knowledge. And you can be lucky all of your life until you go to Australia. And when you go to Australia, for the first time, you encounter a black swan, and you realize that all your life, everything you knew was wrong. Now, maybe it worked. I'm not saying it doesn't work. Maybe it works very well, but it was not right. So it might have happened that your theory that was wrong could have failed you. And we talk about black swans. When we talk about black swans, we talk about events that are unexpected because we cannot know them. Our knowledge tells us that they cannot happen. There is a beautiful book called The Black Swan, indeed, by Nassim Taleb. And it describes these events, and it says, these are events that come as a complete surprise, and they have a major impact. After they've happened, you think, oh yeah, I could have seen it coming. I could have thought about it. The truth is you couldn't. You could not predict a black swan. Are you still with me? Am I going too fast? Is everything all right? Shubham, I think you did miss something, but you're very welcome to join us, and I'll try to wrap it up at the end for you. Excellent. So are you familiar with any event that is a black swan? So unexpected, could not be predicted, but very dramatic impact, something that happened recently? You can use the chat. The COVID pandemic. That's a good answer. I expected this answer. I'm going to make a quick point here. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit tricky as a person, as a teacher. The corona epidemic, I always try to trick you a little bit, but not because I dislike you. It's because I want you to think, all right? So I disagree. The COVID pandemic was not a surprise. What you see on the left is a map that represents the biggest risks for the planet, for us, for mankind in 2020. And this was prepared last year by the World Economic Forum, by interviewing thousands of decision makers around the world. And you can clearly see up here, I hope you can see, one of the big risks that they predicted, that they expected, was infectious diseases. Now, maybe it's less big, less dramatic, less likely than other events, other risks, but it was there. Decision makers around the world mentioned infectious diseases as a risk for this year. In fact, this has been going on for many years. It's not only in 2019, it was in the previous editions as well. In fact, not only we expected the pandemic that could happen, we also thought about how can we prepare for it. And there's a special issue of this journal, the Harvard Business Review, that you'll become familiar with when you join HALT. And this journal had a special issue on how to prepare for a pandemic. And it was published 14 years ago. Okay, so it's not true we didn't predict it. It's not true that we didn't know. We didn't know. What is true is that we chose not to prepare for it. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But I also want to tell you an example of an actual black swan that I've seen. In April, end of April this year, the price of oil went below zero for the first time in history. How can oil be negative? I mean, I live in the UAE. I do a lot of work with oil and gas companies, and I can guarantee that no one knew that oil could become negative price. In fact, when I spoke with executives from oil and gas companies, and um, I discussed this in my course, in my trainings with them on future Foresight. I asked them, so could it ever be zero? They looked at me like I'm crazy. Of course not. I mean, extracting oil costs money. You can't just give it away for free. They didn't really think that it could be below $20 for any long period of time. But it just so happened that it went below zero for the first time. And that changed completely what we believe is possible today. So let me bring this, summarize this a little bit. I've identified, I've mentioned to you a few different types of change. So the linear ones, the one that go in a linear way, like the big trend of obesity we discussed at the beginning, that's an example. Then you have counterintuitive change, change that doesn't stop anymore. You have accelerating change, unexpected. You have all sorts of change trajectories out there. And that means a couple of things. The first is that predicting what's happening is very difficult, but especially that the ecosystem, the context wherein we make decisions is increasingly turbulent, or VUCA. And by VUCA, we mean volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. This is a big concept. You will hear about VUCA a lot in your master's degree or in your degrees, in your bachelor, because it's becoming a commonplace. Everybody talks about VUCA. We need to learn how to navigate VUCA, how to understand, how to respond, and so on. So now that we said all this, that was the first part. We have 3 parts in the presentation. The next 2 parts are a little shorter. So how do you make sense of it? And how do you not make sense of it? So let's move on to the next topic. And I have the second part of your poll waiting for you. I hope you're ready. Are you ready? I just want to share with you a little concept very quickly. When we talk about catastrophic events or very rare events like the pandemic, we call them the 100-year something. So you see here a photo of the 2005 Katrina hurricane in the US, which flooded completely New Orleans. And we said that was a 100-year flood. And what that means in a nutshell is that it can happen in any given year with a probability of a 1%. Okay, so keep this in mind as we go back to the poll. Now, if you've joined us after we did the first round of the poll, it doesn't matter, just join us, okay? Just take the poll. You can do so by using the QR code scanner on your phone. So go there. You can use the link in the chat, or you can go to menti.com. So Stephen just posted it again. Yes, thank you. So you can click the link in the chat, or you can go to menti.com and use the code 741760. All right. Are you actually ready? Because now it's becoming a little trickier, huh? Or so I hope. All right. I will open the next question and then I'll go pull the curtains because there is the sun shining in my face that bothers me a bit. Okay. The next question is, if a 100-year flood happens this year, what is the probability that it happens next year? Yes, well done. Most of you answered correctly. So the probability is always 1% in any given year by definition. So well done. Let's see how that affected the leaderboard. All right, very good. So Mitul, you're number 1, James and Ahmed. Well done. It's not going to be easy to keep that slot, huh? So everyone else, please try to climb to the top spot. Question number 2. What is the probability of a 100-year flood not happening next year? All right, time is up. Okay, of course. If it has a 1% probability of happening, it has a 99% probability not happening. Very good, very good. So this will probably have moved a little bit the leaderboard again. Let's see. Courtney, you did well in this one. Natasha did well. James, well done. All right. Question number 3 or 6, if you count the previous ones. What's the probability of a 100-year flood happening at least once in the next 10 years? All right, I see a few different answers, but the correct answer is 9.56%. Now, I'm not going to explain that to you, but when you start your courses, you will take a course of statistics that will teach you why that's the right answer, depending on the probability distribution. So it's about 10%, just to keep it simple. All right, this is the end of the poll. Let's see who's the winner. Wow. You scored 1,000 points in this question alone. How did you do that? Okay, Jose, well done. I'm going to capture a screen grab of this. So if you want this photo, just you can just contact me on LinkedIn. I'll send it to you. Well done, Jose. And also Courtney, Yashvi, all of you. Luisa, Elena, well done. So once again, why did I ask you these questions? Of course, I'm not trying to test your knowledge. This is not the point. The point is to have you think. Why we have a number of events that are extremely rare. Okay, we had a recession in 2008. We have another one now. That recession caught the world by surprise. This is the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States. And he said, it was not supposed to happen. It was the worst financial crisis in history. Nothing like that had ever happened before. And it will not happen again, maybe in 50 years, but it will happen again. And the same thing, of course, you can think about the corona pandemic. It's a 100-year pandemic. What does it mean? It means it's a very tiny probability of happening and a very large probability of not happening, but it will happen. So what's going on here? What's going on are a number of things. The first one is that we take too much comfort in these probabilities for a number of reasons. The first reason is that we assume that we can calculate this probability, but these events are so rare and they happen over such a long period of time that we don't know the probability of such rare events. The other problem is that we use historical data, what's happened in the past, to be prepared to predict what can happen in the future. But that, limits our capability to think about something even more dramatic. Look, the 2008 financial crisis was not like the previous crisis. It was much bigger. The corona pandemic was not like a previous pandemic. It was much bigger. So if you only use historical data to make predictions about the future based on probabilities, you will fail. And even if you get your probabilities right, that still doesn't help you make a decision. Why? Because if you're a rational decision maker and you have limited resources and you need to make an investment, are you going to invest on the 1% probability that something happens or on the 99% probability that it doesn't? And so most people just discount this 1% and they say, well, it's not going to happen next year. It's such a limited probability. Let me put all of my eggs in the basket of not happening. So this is a problem. This is why I wanted you to do this little poll and think about it. One way to change the way we look at this is to start having a slightly longer time horizon. Start thinking about the long run rather than just the super short run. And if you do so and you start thinking, okay, what about the next 10 years? Now, within the next 10 years, there's a 10% probability that it happens. And suddenly people will listen because now it's an event worth considering. But nonetheless, even in the face of this inability to make predictions, what can you do? One thing you can do is to embrace what we call antifragility. I'm going to take a second here just to make sure that I'm not going too fast. Am I all right? Are you all right? Jose is all right. I mean, you won, man. I mean, what else do you want today? I'm kidding. I know I have a very rich presentation, lots of content. I don't want to overwhelm you. I want you to take something useful back. Okay. So if you want me to slow down, or if you want me to explain things with more time, just let me know. You can go to the chat and let me know. All right. Okay. Thank you, Anna. So two techniques, two methods to prepare instead of trying to predict, because we said prediction is inaccurate and prediction doesn't help you make the right decision. One way is to start thinking about becoming anti-fragile. I'll tell you what it means, because it's a new word for many of you. A system is fragile when something unexpected happens and the system is crushed. So 30% of our companies went bankrupt because of the corona pandemic. It means they were fragile. Something unexpected happened, they're out of business. Some businesses stayed the same. They actually survived. It means they were robust. So some disorder, some disruption comes, but they don't break, they stay the same. We have a fourth concept. I didn't put it in the slide. I'm just going to tell you what it is because I know many of you are familiar with the word. We have certain systems that are resilient. And what that means is a system that gets hit, it suffers from a change, but then it recovers. Okay? That's resilience. And then you have anti-fragile systems. And what that means is that it's a system that in the face of adversity and unexpected disruption, not only survives, it becomes better. Now, this is a very powerful concept. I'm going to show you what it means graphically with a graph, so it's a bit more technical, and I'll give you a couple of examples. As I said, I'm not going to cover the entire topic in a lot of detail, just in this presentation, but this is a topic that we definitely teach in the courses. I teach in my courses. Okay, a little graph to make life fun, at least from a professor's perspective. So what you see on the left here is what are the outcomes or the consequences. So very negative, neutral, or very positive in a certain system across multiple possibilities, multiple events that can happen, predictable, unpredictable, rare, not rare. What you see here is a system that is probably doing fine quite frequently, but it can never be extremely good. However, when things go wrong, it can become extremely bad. It can go out of business. It can disappear. I'll give you an example in a moment. This is a fragile system. A system that's anti-fragile instead is a system that can go negative, but it has a limit. It can't go too bad. On the other hand, when the right circumstances happen, it can go incredibly well. That is an anti-fragile system. So an example, super basic example. Airplane systems, they're very fragile. Why? Because they can arrive on time. They can even arrive early. But how early? I mean, there's a limit in how early they can arrive. But they can also arrive late. They can also arrive very late. In fact, they can also be canceled and never arrive. So there's no limit to how bad the outcome can be for them. Okay? That's a notion of a fragile system. And in business, I'll give you an example, which is frankly kind of absurd. This is the way jeans are manufactured in California. So the jeans are actually made in California, most of them stitched and put together. And then when the jeans are almost ready, you put them on a cargo ship. They go at sea for about 12 days and they get to China. When they get to China, they get offloaded and brought to a workshop where Chinese workers stitch the zipper, only that, at a cheaper cost, okay? Then you repackage them, put them on a cargo ship, and ship them back to California for 12 more days. And by doing so, you save a few cents on each and every pair of jeans. This is the concept of efficiency. You squeeze the most value out of your resources. And that in some way is good. But look at the system, not from the perspective of efficiency, look at it from the perspective of fragility. Now, this is definitely a system where when things go well, you save a few cents, but you can never save $1 million. It's always a few cents. But if there is bad weather at sea, there is a trade war with China, there is a strike of the workers of the port, you name it, the cargo can be delayed for days, months, it can be lost. So there's almost no limit to how bad it can be hit. Okay? So this is an example of being fragile. I'm going to skip a couple of quotes here because I just want to jump to the third point. The third point here is not only about preparing, making decisions that make you anti-fragile, which is already important. But what I really want you to do, and I know this is a lot to ask, and I didn't tell you at the beginning because I wanted to tell you now, what I want you to do is to change the way you think about time. Now, what does that even mean? How do you think about time? I'm going to tell you the way you think about time. You think about time in two ways, and both of them are correct, but not useful. I want you to think about time in a third way. So, at some point, just over 2,000 years before Christ, if I remember correctly, I don't know, I'm probably exaggerating a bit less. We started thinking about time in a linear way. Let me tell you what it means. So I think it's quite easy. It sounds philosophical, but it's quite easy. We started thinking, look, what happened in the past is a chain, it's a sequence of events that happened in a certain way, and they brought us here to the present time. See, it's a line. And if we keep looking at where the events are going, we can just maybe predict the future. The first time we started thinking this way, it's when we started trying to make predictions. That's when oracles, fortune tellers, priests started interrogating the flights of the birds, the interiors of sacrificial animals, to look at where the future was headed. And we still look at it this way. We say, oh, there's something that's happened in the past, there's it now, and that's where we're headed. That's one way. The other way, this is probably the most ancient, the most traditional way of thinking about time, is to say, look, now it's afternoon. It's almost 6 p.m. in the UAE. Then it's night, and then after night it's morning, and then it's afternoon again. And then it's night, and then it's morning, and then it's afternoon, and night, and morning, and afternoon. You get it, right? So now it's summer, and then it's winter, and then it's spring, and then it's summer again, and then spring, winter, and spring, and summer again. So we think about time in a cyclical way. These are the two ways, either linear or cyclical. If you think about time in a linear way, you think about the future as something that you can predict and respond to or prepare for. But I've shown you that's not really true. If you think about time in a cyclical way, you don't need to think about the future. The future is more of the same. It will just come back. And that doesn't help you either. So how do you think about the future instead in a way that's useful and helps you navigate VUCA times? You need to think about time as a cone that opens in front of you. If this is now, the further you think about the future, the more different things become realistic and possible. They're not necessarily the most likely, but they are possible. So in a time where where the context is VUCA and change is exponential, it's counterintuitive, it's all the type of changes we described, thinking only about the most likely future will not help you. You should start thinking about all of these different things that can happen. And instead of trying to predict which one will really happen, prepare for all of them. Prepare for them all and be anti-fragile. Once again, this is something I teach. If you come to HALT, in fact, in any master program you do, your capstone project, your final project will be a future challenge. So you will have to help an organization prepare for the future. It's amazing challenge, very fascinating. I usually have a lot of fun, more than my students. They tend to sweat a bit, but it's really valuable. So I'm not going to spend time teaching you how to do this. I also want to leave you a couple of minutes for questions, because I see that someone put questions in the Q&A section. So organizations that embrace this approach, they do three things. They keep looking at what's changing. They try to make sense of where the change is going, and they run small experiments to test whether they're right or wrong. So there is a range of specific techniques and methodologies that you can embrace to become a better decision maker. And the benefit, this is a piece of research that came out a couple of years ago. What it shows is that the organizations that embrace this type of foresight outperform others in profitability and market capitalization by a huge margin. Enough to justify doing it, even just because if you want to be a good leader, a good business leader, you can't ignore the things that other good leaders do. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I know the argument is a bit more sophisticated. And so when you try to prepare for this conical future, there are many techniques and many things you can do. I'm just going to mention one, but super quickly, and this is really my last slide, mostly because this is the book I wrote. And the book came out last winter. So the book tells you, in the face of such expanding range of possibilities that's going on, what are the forces that cause change? Specifically, when it comes to making strategic decisions, and specifically for the time frame of the fourth industrial revolution, which is the time we live in now. Okay, I'm not going to spend any time on this. I just want to say I'm not trying to sell you the book. So if you're curious about it, before you buy it, go to YouTube. You'll find a couple of videos. I explain chapter by chapter what the book is about, so you can get all the content for free and you don't have to read the book. Okay, so just that. But as I said, this was my last slide. So let's go back to the main points that I promised I would give you. The first one is that there are many types of change around us, most of which are non-linear, and so they're difficult to understand and to predict and respond to. They make our world more VUCA. In a more VUCA world, prediction is not a good idea, because it's usually inaccurate, but even when it's accurate, it doesn't help you make decisions. Because if you think that something has only 1% probability of happening, you will ignore it. But then when it happens and it has a big impact, you regret it. So it's not only about probabilities, it's about much more than that. So what can you do instead? You can start preparing instead. And how do you prepare? In two ways. One, by cultivating foresight, so preparing for this expanding future. And the other one is making decisions that make you anti-fragile. All right, I hope I actually covered everything. I promise you. I hope it all makes sense.